You know what keeps me up at night? It's not the price of gold. It's not inflation. It's not even the debt spiral we're watching unfold in real time. It's something far more immediate, far more dangerous, and something that almost nobody is talking about. And I need to walk you through this, because what I'm about to show you has happened before. It's happening right now in other countries, and the mechanisms are already in place for it to happen here. Let me start with a question that's going to sound extreme, but stay with me. What would you do if tomorrow morning you woke up and the government announced that private gold ownership above a certain threshold was now illegal? Not regulated, not taxed, illegal. You'd think I'm being dramatic, right? You'd think that could never happen in a free country. But here's the thing. It already did. April 5th, 1933. Executive Order 6102. Franklin Delano Roosevelt made it illegal for American citizens to own gold. Not some of it. All of it. You had until May 1st to turn in your gold coins, your gold bullion, your gold certificates to the Federal Reserve in exchange for $20.67 per ounce. And if you didn't comply, $10,000 fine. That's about $230,000 in today's money. Or 10 years in prison. Or both. Now I know what you're thinking. That was 1933. We were in the Great Depression. Different times, different circumstances. But let me show you why that logic is dangerously flawed. Because the conditions that led to that confiscation, they're not just similar to today. In many ways, they're worse. In 1933, the federal debt was $22.5 billion. Today it's $36 trillion and climbing by $1 trillion every 100 days. In 1933, the dollar was backed by gold, and they needed to confiscate it to devalue the currency and escape the deflationary trap. Today, the dollar is backed by nothing but confidence, and that confidence is eroding faster than most people realize. The BRICS nations just announced they're developing a gold-backed trade currency. Central banks bought 1,037 tons of gold in 2023 alone, the second highest year on record. They're not doing this for fun. They're preparing for something. But here's where it gets really interesting. And this is the part that nobody's connecting. You don't need an executive order anymore. You don't need soldiers going door to door. The infrastructure for a modern gold confiscation is already built. It's digital, it's automated, and it's far more efficient than anything Roosevelt could have dreamed of. Let me explain how this works, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. First, let's talk about reporting requirements. Right now, if you sell more than $10,000 worth of gold to a dealer, they file a Form 8300 with the IRS. That's a cash transaction report. If you buy certain types of gold coins in quantities above specific thresholds, dealers file a 1099-B. The government knows. They're tracking. They're building a database of who owns what. Now, you might say, well, I bought my gold privately. Cash transaction, no paper trail. And maybe you did. But here's the problem. The moment you try to sell it, the moment you try to convert it back to currency, you're in the system. And if they decide to implement capital controls, if they decide that gold sales above a certain amount require special permits, or are subject to windfall profit taxes, or are simply prohibited, what are you going to do with it? Let me give you a real-world example of how this plays out. India, 2016. Prime Minister Modi announces overnight that 500 and 1,000 rupee notes, which made up 86% of the currency in circulation, are no longer legal tender. You have until December 30th to deposit them in a bank or exchange them. Chaos. Absolute chaos. People standing in lines for days, small businesses collapsing. And here's the kicker. The government used this as an opportunity to crack down on undeclared wealth. If you deposited large amounts of cash that didn't match your tax returns, you had some explaining to do. Now, they didn't confiscate gold directly, but they created an environment where holding physical assets outside the banking system became incredibly risky. And gold sales spiked as people panicked and converted to the new currency, often at terrible prices. Or look at what's happening right now, in 2024 and 2025. The European Union is implementing new regulations under the Anti-Money Laundering Directive that will require dealers to report all cash transactions over 10,000 euros and will create a centralized database of gold ownership. They're calling it transparency. They're calling it fighting financial crime. But what they're really doing is building the infrastructure for control. Because once they know who owns what Once they have the database, once they have the tracking mechanisms, implementing restrictions becomes trivial. Now, let's talk about the mechanics of how a modern confiscation would actually work, because this is where it gets sophisticated. They don't need to make gold ownership illegal. That's too obvious, too politically costly. Instead, they make it economically unviable. Here's how. Step 1. Implement a windfall profits tax on gold sales. Let's say gold goes to $5,000 an ounce, which many analysts think is conservative. The government says, okay, any gains above $3,000 an ounce are subject to a 90% tax. Suddenly, your $5,000 gold is worth $3,200 after tax. You're incentivized to sell now, before it gets worse. Step 2. Restrict where and how you can sell. Maybe you can only sell to licensed dealers who report to the government. Maybe there are monthly limits on how much you can sell. Maybe there are waiting periods. You create friction. You create fear. You create urgency. Step 3. And this is the really clever part. You make it illegal to use gold as payment for goods and services. This is already the case in most jurisdictions, by the way. Legal tender laws require that government-issued currency be accepted for debts. But they could go further. They could make it a crime to accept gold as payment, to barter with gold, to use gold in any transaction outside of approved channels. Suddenly, your gold isn't money anymore. It's just a commodity that you can only sell through government-monitored channels at government-influenced prices subject to government taxation. And here's the thing that really bothers me. The legal framework for all of this already exists. The Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, which was the basis for Roosevelt's gold confiscation, is still on the books. It's been amended, but the core authority is still there. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act gives the president broad authority to regulate financial transactions during a national emergency. And we've been in a declared state of emergency almost continuously since 2001. The Treasury Department has the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, which can freeze assets, block transactions, and impose sanctions with minimal oversight. The infrastructure is there. The legal authority is there. All that's missing is the political will and the right crisis. So what would trigger it? What would be the catalyst that makes them pull this trigger? Let me walk you through the most likely scenario, and I want you to think about how close we already are to this. Imagine the dollar loses its reserve currency status. Not completely, not overnight, but significantly. Maybe BRICS launches their gold-backed trade currency and it starts gaining traction. Maybe Saudi Arabia starts accepting yuan for oil. Maybe the treasury auction fails and foreign buyers don't show up. The dollar starts falling. Not gradually, sharply. And as the dollar falls, gold starts rising. Not to $3,000, not to $5,000, to $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 an ounce. And suddenly, everyone wants gold. Everyone's trying to get out of dollars and into hard assets. Now, the government has a problem. A big problem. Because as gold rises, it's a vote of no confidence in the currency. It's a signal to the world that the dollar is failing. And they can't have that. So what do? They can't stop people from buying gold. That would be too obvious. But they can make it very expensive to own gold. They can tax it. They can regulate it. They can create such a hostile environment for gold ownership that people voluntarily give it up. And if that doesn't work, if gold keeps rising and the dollar keeps falling, then they pull out the big guns. National emergency, economic crisis. And suddenly, private gold ownership above a certain threshold is a threat to national security. Sound far-fetched? Let me read you something. This is from a 2012 research paper by the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago titled The Liquidation of Government Debt. Quote, "The liquidation of debt via inflation or financial repression is a policy option that remains available to governments today." Financial repression. That's the term they use. It means keeping interest rates below the rate of inflation so that the real value of debt decreases over time. It means capital controls. It means forcing people to hold government bonds. It means restricting alternative stores of value, like gold. Now I want to pause here for a second because if you're sitting on $100,000 or more in retirement accounts, there's something you need to know about. I put together a free guide on how gold IRAs work, and it's in the description below. It covers how you can get physical gold into your retirement account without triggering tax penalties, and more importantly, how the structure of an IRA provides certain protections that holding gold outside of a retirement account doesn't. It's worth looking at if this is relevant to your situation. Okay, back to what we're talking about. Let me show you what the warning signs look like, because they're already appearing. First, increased reporting requirements. We're seeing this globally. The EU's new regulations, the IRS's focus on cryptocurrency and precious metals, the push for central bank digital currencies, which would give governments unprecedented visibility into every transaction. Second, rhetoric around hoarding and speculation. When governments start talking about people hoarding gold or speculating in precious metals during a crisis, that's a red flag. That's the language they use to justify intervention. Third, restrictions on cash. India's demonetization, the EU's limits on cash transactions, the push to eliminate large denomination bills. When they restrict cash, they're restricting your ability to transact privately, and gold becomes one of the few remaining options for private wealth storage. Fourth, and this is crucial, watch what the wealthy are doing. Not what they're saying, what they're doing. Ray Dalio has been vocal about owning gold. Stanley Druckenmiller increased his gold position significantly. Central banks are buying at record levels. But here's what's interesting. They're not just buying gold. They're repatriating it. Germany brought 674 tons of gold back from New York and Paris. Austria, Netherlands, Belgium, they're all bringing their gold home. Why? Because they don't trust that it'll be accessible when they need it. If central banks don't trust each other with gold storage, what does that tell you about the stability of the system? Now, let's talk about what happened after Roosevelt's confiscation, because this is the part of the story that most people don't know. After Americans were forced to turn in their gold at $20.67 an ounce, the government revalued gold to $35 an ounce. That's a 69% devaluation of the dollar overnight. Everyone who turned in their gold got robbed. They were paid in dollars that were immediately worth 40% less in terms of gold. The government effectively confiscated 40% of the wealth of everyone who owned gold. And here's the really insidious part. It wasn't just gold owners who got hurt. It was everyone. Because the devaluation meant that everything priced in gold, which was everything internationally, suddenly cost more in dollar terms. Imports got more expensive. The cost of living went up. But the government got what it wanted. It inflated away a chunk of its debt burden, and it regained control of monetary policy. Could they do this again? Absolutely. But it would look different. Instead of revaluing gold, they'd probably implement a two-tier system. Official gold price and market gold price. You can sell to the government at the official price, which is capped. Or you can try to sell on the private market, but that's subject to the windfall profits tax and reporting requirements and all the friction they can create. Either way, they extract value from gold owners, and they discourage gold ownership going forward. But here's where it gets even more interesting. There's a scenario that's even more likely than outright confiscation, and it's actually more dangerous because it's more subtle. It's called forced conversion. Here's how it works. The government announces a new digital dollar, a central bank digital currency, and they say, you have 18 months to convert your old dollars to new digital dollars. After that, old dollars are no longer valid. Now, to get digital dollars, you have to go through the banking system. You have to verify your identity. You have to declare your assets. And if you have significant assets that don't match your tax history, you have some explaining to do. Suddenly, everyone with physical gold is in a bind, because to convert that gold to the new currency, they have to sell it, report it, and potentially face questions about where it came from and why it wasn't declared before. This is already happening in China, by the way. The digital yuan is being rolled out, and it comes with complete government visibility into every transaction. They can see what you buy, where you buy it, who you buy it from, and they can program the currency. They can make it so it expires if you don't spend it. They can restrict what you can buy with it. They can freeze it if you do something they don't like. And if you think that can't happen here, you're not paying attention. The Federal Reserve has been researching a digital dollar for years. The infrastructure is being built right now. So what do? How do you protect yourself against this risk? Because that's what this is really about. Not fear-mongering, not paranoia, risk management. And the answer is more complex than just buy gold and hide it in your backyard. Although, honestly, that's not the worst strategy. But let me walk you through a more sophisticated approach. First, understand the different forms of gold and how they're treated differently. Gold coins, especially American eagles and Canadian maple leafs, have different reporting requirements than gold bars. Smaller denominations are easier to transact with and less likely to trigger reporting thresholds. Gold jewelry is generally exempt from confiscation historically because it's considered personal property, not investment. Gold held in an IRA has different legal protections than gold held personally. Gold held offshore in a secure vault in Switzerland or Singapore is outside the immediate reach of U.S. authorities, though it comes with its own risks and reporting requirements. Second, diversification isn't just about asset classes, it's about jurisdictions. If you're seriously worried about confiscation risk, you need to think about geographic diversification. Some of your wealth in the U.S., some offshore, some in physical assets, some in financial assets, some in real estate, some in businesses. You want to make sure that no single government action can wipe you out. This is what the ultra-wealthy do. They don't keep all their eggs in one basket, and they definitely don't keep all their baskets in one country. Third, understand the difference between legal ownership and beneficial ownership. There are structures, trusts, LLCs, offshore entities that can provide layers of protection. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not giving legal advice, but I'm telling you that sophisticated wealth holders use these structures for a reason. They create complexity. They create deniability. They create time. And in a crisis, time is everything. Fourth, and this is crucial, have a plan for different scenarios. What do you do if they announce a windfall profits tax? What do you do if they announce mandatory reporting? What do you do if they announce confiscation? You need to have thought through these scenarios in advance because when it happens, it'll happen fast, and you won't have time to think clearly. Maybe your plan is to sell immediately and take the loss. Maybe it's to hold and risk the penalties. Maybe it's to move assets offshore. Maybe it's to convert to a different form of wealth storage. But you need to have thought it through. Now, let me address the elephant in the room. Some of you are thinking, this guy's crazy. This is never going to happen. The government would never do this. And maybe you're right. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe we'll look back in 10 years and laugh at how paranoid everyone was. But let me ask you this. What's the cost of being wrong? If I'm wrong and you prepared for confiscation risk, what did you lose? Maybe some time. Maybe some transaction costs. Maybe some opportunity cost. But if I'm right and you didn't prepare, what did you lose? Potentially everything. Your wealth, your security, your ability to protect your family. That's not a symmetrical risk. That's not a bet I'm willing to take. And here's the thing. Even if outright confiscation never happens, the trends we're seeing, increased reporting, increased regulation, increased government control over financial transactions, those are real. Those are happening right now, and they all point in the same direction. Less financial privacy, less financial freedom, more government oversight, more government control. And in that environment, having strategies to protect your wealth, to maintain some level of privacy, to keep some assets outside the system, that's just prudent. That's just smart risk management. Let me give you one more historical example, and then I'll tie this all together. In 1959, the U.S. government made it illegal for Americans to own gold abroad. That's right. Not just in the U.S., anywhere. If you were an American citizen and you owned gold in Switzerland or London or anywhere else, you were breaking the law. They closed that loophole because people were getting around the domestic ban by storing gold overseas. And this lasted until 1974, when Gerald Ford finally repealed the gold ban. 41 years. 2 generations of Americans grew up in a country where owning gold was illegal. Let that sink in. This isn't ancient history. This is within living memory. And here's what's really interesting about that period. The people who held gold illegally, who hid it, who stored it offshore despite the law, they were vindicated. Because when gold ownership became legal again in 1974, the price was $183 an ounce. By 1980, it hit $850. The people who broke the law and held gold made a fortune. The people who followed the law and turned in their gold in 1933 got robbed. Now, I'm not advocating breaking the law. I'm not saying you should hide assets or evade taxes or do anything illegal. But I am saying that sometimes the law is unjust. Sometimes the law is designed to transfer wealth from citizens to the government. And sometimes, protecting yourself and your family requires thinking very carefully about how you structure your affairs. So where does this leave us? What's the bottom line? Here's what I think. The risk of gold confiscation, whether outright or through economic coercion, is higher than most people realize. The mechanisms are in place. The legal authority exists. The historical precedent is clear. And the economic conditions that would trigger such an action are developing right now. The debt spiral, the loss of reserve currency status, the rise of alternative monetary systems. These are all real trends that are accelerating. And when the crisis comes, and it will come, governments will do what they always do. They'll protect themselves at the expense of their citizens. But here's the good news. You're not helpless. You can prepare. You can diversify. You can structure your affairs in ways that provide protection. You can educate yourself about the risks and the options. And most importantly, you can act now, while you still have time, while the window is still open. Because that window won't stay open forever. The regulations are tightening. The reporting requirements are increasing. The control mechanisms are being put in place. And once they're fully implemented, your options will be much more limited. This isn't about fear. This is about awareness. This is about understanding the game that's being played and making sure you're not the one left holding the bag when the music stops. Because the music is going to stop. The question isn't if. The question is when. And the question is whether you'll be ready.